protecting this strait for the entire world, for China and everyone. I don't mind protecting it for China. I don't mind protecting it for anybody, but it's unfair that we're not in somehow compensated. And we've been doing this for many years. It's bothered me 25 years ago.
It seems like ages ago when Trump started the war against Iran, and now he is saying that he wanted to impose a toll on the passage through the Strait of Hormuz, and he wants people to pay for it. First, he said he wants the Gulf countries plus Israel to pay for U.S. operation in the Gulf to keep the strait open. And more recently, he said, you know what? In fact, China should pay because United States is trying to open the Strait of Hormuz, hold it open for China. So China should pay for the privilege of having U.S. Navy trying to uphold the passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So what's your take on that?
Look, there's something a little bit strange, I think, about the mentality that's being brought to the table here, which reduces everything to this idea of a financial transaction. But obviously, that's the framework that President Trump brings to the table on just about everything. And you can see that he is now flapping around trying to find some kind of a transaction format that can dig him, the United States Navy, and the United States' broad reputation out of the hole. And so each day there's something new. You can imagine that this is the kind of way that he would contemplate engaging in real estate transactions, where you throw in new things to either reshape a discussion or a negotiation, to try to open up a new angle on something, to maybe prod an obdurate counterparty along to shift somebody who's digging their heels in or something. And it seems to me that as the days go by, for reasons that I think you can only put down to President Trump's own life experiences and his learned approach to dealing with the world, that we get this what is clearly a series of ad hoc reactive interventions laced with a heavy dose of personal pique, where his displeasures and his anger and frustrations boil to the surface. But what is also clear, Carl, is that the United States does not have actually a clear strategy or a game plan, or indeed even, I think, a clear picture of what a desirable outcome is anymore. If the main outcome originally, and indeed over the last 30 years, has been the project of Greater Israel, then clearly that project right now is in tatters. The last piece of this jigsaw puzzle, if you will, as documented in various think tank documents in times past, was to isolate Iran and provide a clean pathway for a military attack, which would ultimately lead to an overthrow of the Iranian government and clear the pathway then for a friendly environment with US military impositions across the region to secure the Greater Israel project, and it's in tatters. Then, of course, we've got other objectives, the so-called objectives around prohibiting Iran from developing a nuclear program and nuclear missiles. Well, that in many ways, of course, is in tatters as well when you compare it to the situation that was the case in 2015, when President Trump's great nemesis, the one that he actually really compares himself to, Barack Obama, had negotiated the JCPOA. And right now, it's hard to say that the current state of play in relation to Iran and its nuclear program is any better from the United States point of view than it was 11 years ago, in tatters. The Iranian government seems to be more consolidated and stable than it has been ever since the Americans created the mythology that the Islamic Republic was an unstable, religious authoritarian regime, right? We saw the images of the funeral of the assassinated leader a week or so ago, a couple of weeks ago perhaps now, where tens of millions of people gathered in public as part of the mourning process. Now, whether it was 10 million or 40 million, I don't know. I didn't count them. But it was a very, very large number of people. And that showed that the government does enjoy a large level of not just generic support from people in Iran, but a level of public energy that gives governments and leaders a renewed sense of purpose. And I think that this particular aspect was totally underestimated by the American intelligence community and by the politicians who prosecuted this Greater Israel project and campaign against Iran. So, and of course, the oil, which you touched on. I mean, what an absolute debacle, Carl. What an absolute debacle. On the 27th of February this year, the Strait of Hormuz was a free-flowing body of water where 140 vessels would move through that passage on a daily basis, carrying 20% of the world's oil, together with 20-odd% of the world's LNG, a large proportion of the world's helium, about 30%, and a whole bunch of the world's petrochemical products. Not to mention, of course, carrying food and other things to the Gulf countries. No tolls, no risk of being intercepted by missiles or drones, nothing. Just a normal body of international water, so the claim went, that boats could travel up and down. Well, that's all gone now, all gone. The United States, of course, can't even impose its own corridor as it sought to wrestle negotiating leverage on the back of the MOU. It broke the MOU. The MOU made it very clear that it was the Iranians who were to administer things for the 60 days. And of course, the Americans decided that wasn't on. And they tried to create an environment where ships could skirt along the Omanian coast and bypass the Iranian waters, ostensibly under cover of US naval protection, so that insurers were willing to back the ships and ship owners would then be comforted that they would have safe passage. Well, that lasted about 2 days, didn't it? Until the first set of ships started being hit and the United States Navy could not protect them. The response then came, which was an intensification or an escalation of the war again, with significant barrage of bombings and missile attacks on Iran, to which Iran's responded. Now, bearing in mind that we've been told for many months now that the Iranian army, the Iranian navy, and the Iranian air force have been totally decimated, right? And for some miraculous reason, they're able to respond, but not just respond in some petty kind of way, but to respond with some very serious and successful attacks on American bases, facilities, and equipment right across the Persian Gulf. So right now, as we speak, it's fair to say that the United States is on the wrong end of the stick of this particular war that it provoked and that it initiated. It currently has no way out. My own suspicion, Carl, is that as rational as it may be for the United States to try to find a negotiated settlement to this dispute, there are two things which makes this almost impossible to resolve in the short term. One is that there remains a strong body of political will amongst those inside the Beltway in Washington for the Greater Israel project to continue, even as mainstream Americans begin to lose their willingness to support that particular policy ambition and as Israel's own standing in the eyes of Americans continues to diminish. And of course, we have this political problem, which is we've got midterm elections coming up in early November, and there isn't a presidency that would want to go into a midterm elections on the back of a defeat in a military conflict that it had initiated. And so we're going to get the kick the can down the road approach. The Trump administration cannot, and it's not just a question of vanity, right? It's not just a question of vanity. There's a whole lot more to it than just vanity. It's America's reputation. It's the reputation of its military capacity. It's a stripping away of the facade of military dominance and preponderance, right? That cannot be admitted. And so you put these two things together, we shouldn't be surprised that the Americans have gone back into stir the hornet's nest. It cannot abide by an agreement that ultimately requires America to take the L, right? The United States has to accept that it cannot get most, if not all, of the things that it wanted from the very get-go. And because of that, it is reluctant, or in fact, structurally unable to, in the term of the presidency that started this war, to accept the loss. It's going to be a problem that the next presidency is going to have to deal with. That means that this is likely to bubble away, sometimes hotter, sometimes less, for a long time to come.
That's very grim because, the easiest solution for Trump administration to dig itself out of the hole is just to simply do nothing, to chill. If they haven't responded to the latest Iranian closure of Strait of Hormuz, particularly in the southern channel on the Omani side, there wouldn't have been a wholesale shutdown of the entire Strait of Hormuz right now. And this, again, is leading to the global oil price spike.
The issue of the Americans chilling in response to Iran's interventions to prohibit passage through the Omanian side of the Strait of Hormuz. There's a reason why it's impossible for the Americans ultimately to chill on that, because if they chilled on that, it would concede that Iran ultimately does exercise full control over the Strait of Hormuz. And the issue isn't just that they exercise control over the Strait of Hormuz and demonstrates the Americans don't have a military solution to this. It also signals the linchpin that fundamentally catalyzes the transformation of the regional security and economic architecture, because once it becomes evident to upstream states in the Gulf that there is no other way of passage other than by arrangement with Iran, then America's position in the Gulf really begins to fall away very quickly. It's already been severely hampered or damaged because the United States has demonstrably been unable to defend its bases across the region. But had it not tried to do something and muddy the waters, so to speak, in relation to control over the Strait of Hormuz, then it would have been game over in the region. So I think that it's a very difficult problem for the Americans without conceding ultimately their position. I struggle to see how this issue gets resolved unless one of two things happens. One, that Iran is defeated and that Greater Israel is imposed with American military preponderance reasserted in the region on the one hand, which seems unlikely at the moment, or on the other hand, that the Americans are ultimately booted out of the region. That seems somewhat more likely, but the Americans aren't going to walk out, without having a say about all of this.